Picture this. Two Formula One cars, identical power units, same driver talent. One dominates in Monaco, the other struggles in Mexico City. The difference? Air itself. Today, we're diving into the invisible physics that changes engine behavior across every circuit on the calendar, and why your turbo's strategy at sea level becomes almost useless 7,400 meters up in the mountains. The stakes here are enormous. We're talking about thousandths of a second that separate champions from the rest of the field. At Monaco, drivers wrestle with full boost, thick air pushing hard against the pistons, engines screaming at their absolute limit. But Mexico City, the air is so thin that the turbo has to work 3 times harder just to compress what isn't there. And temperature adds another layer of chaos. A 10-degree swing can mean your fuel burns differently, your hydraulics respond slower, your tires operate in a completely different window. This isn't just about raw horsepower numbers on a dyno somewhere. This is about who understands their power unit's personality best, who adapts fastest, and who leaves performance on the table. Teams that get this wrong, they're chasing setup changes that were never going to work, burning development tokens on the wrong fixes, watching their drivers fade when they should be charging. So let's unpack how these turbo engines actually adapt. Because the engineering hidden inside modern F1 power units is nothing short of brilliant. Think of a turbocharger as a tiny jet engine bolted to the side of your power unit, spinning at speeds that would make a helicopter jealous. We're talking over 150,000 revolutions per minute. Its job is beautifully simple. Suck in the air that rushes past the front of the car, compress it, cram that denser, oxygen-rich air into the cylinders, and let the fuel burn hotter and faster. But here's where it gets fascinating. The turbo only works as well as the air feeding it will allow, and air is not a constant. At sea level in Monaco, the air is thick and cooperative, about 14.7 pounds of atmospheric pressure pushing down on everything. The turbo gulps that dense air, compresses it further, and sends it straight into the combustion chamber where millions of tiny fuel droplets ignite in a controlled explosion that shoves the pistons down with enormous force. Every lap at Monaco, the power unit is working in this rich, forgiving environment, cranking out nearly 1,000 horsepower without breaking a sweat. Now fly to Mexico City, perched 7,280 feet above sea level, and everything changes instantly. The air is thin, only about 76% as dense as Monaco's, which means fewer oxygen molecules are available for every breath the turbo takes. The turbo spins faster, trying harder, squeezing what little air it can find. But it's like trying to fill a bucket from a trickle instead of a faucet. Engineers have to push the boost pressure higher, the turbo working at the absolute edge of its mechanical limits, just to achieve what it did effortlessly at sea level. But there's a ceiling. Push too hard and the turbo itself fails, or the engine structure can't handle the internal pressures, or fuel consumption spirals out of control. So Mexico City becomes a puzzle where engineers must extract maximum power from thinner air, while respecting the laws of physics and the durability regulations that govern the sport. Temperature throws another wrench into the gearbox, and this is where it gets truly complex. A cool morning session might see air temperatures of 20 degrees Celsius, air so fresh and dense that the turbo finds life easy. Boost pressures can be lower and power flows naturally. But by afternoon qualifying, the sun's hammered the track to 35, 40, even 45 degrees Celsius in places, and now the air entering the turbo is hotter and thinner, almost tropical. That 10 or 15 degree swing doesn't sound dramatic until you realize it affects how fuel vaporizes inside the injectors, how the air charges expand in the intake manifold, and how the intercooler, the heat exchanger that cools compressed air before it enters the engine, can or cannot do its job effectively. In Brazil, during a humid race day, moisture in the air actually helps. It cools the incoming charge through evaporation and adds oxygen molecules that denser dry air wouldn't contain. In the deserts of Abu Dhabi, that moisture vanishes and the air becomes a hostile, thin opponent. So when you see a team struggling at a particular track, it's not always because they built a slow car. It might be because they misjudged how their turbo's boost strategy needs to evolve as temperature swings through the day. The engineers are essentially rewriting their power unit's DNA lap after lap, building mental models of how much pressure to squeeze, when to adjust fuel mixtures, and how aggressive to push before hitting the wall of physics. We've seen this story play out countless times on the world's most demanding racetracks, and 2016 gave us one of the clearest examples: the Monaco Grand Prix. Drivers were complaining all weekend about a lack of power delivery in the slow corners, and it wasn't because the engines were broken. It was because Monaco sits at sea level with dense, cool air, so teams had conservatively tuned their boost maps expecting that stable condition. But when a mid-afternoon incident brought out the safety car, the track temperature climbed rapidly, and suddenly the air density dropped measurably in the space of 30 minutes. The drivers who'd been struggling, particularly those in machinery with less aggressive cooling solutions, found themselves with even thinner air to work with, and their lap times plateaued while rivals adapted on the fly. Fast forward to the 2017 Mexican Grand Prix at Mexico City, nearly 2,300 meters above sea level, where the air is roughly 25% less dense than at sea level. Ferrari came into that weekend confident their engine was strong, but their turbo boost strategy was optimized for European circuits with normal barometric pressure. They watched Mercedes methodically dial in their hybrid system's power deployment across multiple practice sessions, learning exactly how much boost could be safely extracted without thermal damage when every breath of air the engine took was already oxygen-starved. By Sunday, Lewis Hamilton controlled the race, and the gap to the nearest Ferrari wasn't just talent. It was data, pressure maps, and a turbo management strategy refined for that singular environment. Then there's Brazil 2016, where rain transformed the Interlagos paddock into a humidity crucible. The air was warm but water-laden, and that moisture actually helped engine power. Teams that understood the thermodynamic advantage, that humid air carries more oxygen density despite lower pressure, pushed their boost calibration harder during wet phases. Those who didn't account for the shift found themselves either leaving power on the table when conditions were favorable, or suffering heat rejection issues when the rain finally stopped and that same high boost setting met dry, hot afternoon air. These aren't flukes or footnotes in a race report. They're proof that in modern Formula One, the turbo doesn't just compress air. It solves an equation that changes every single lap. So here's a thought experiment. Imagine two identical Formula One cars, two identical drivers, one perfect lap at sea level and one at 2,250 meters altitude in Mexico City. Same engine, same fuel, same tires, but the second car's turbo is gasping for air that's 23% less dense. Now, what if instead of accepting that disadvantage, the team simply wound up the boost pressure to compensate? In theory, you'd get your power back. Turbochargers exist precisely to solve this problem. But there's a catch that teams learn the hard way. That higher boost pressure generates more heat, and at altitude where ambient air is thinner and cooler, air is scarcer. Your intercooler has less thermal capacity to work with. Push too hard, and your intake charge temperature climbs beyond what the fuel system, the pistons, and the hybrid battery can safely tolerate. You're caught between a rock and a thin air place. Dial up boost and risk catastrophic engine failure mid-race. Dial it back and surrender a full % of power to your rivals. The real-world answer isn't brute force, it's surgical precision. Modern power units adjust boost gradually across the lap, harvest more electrical energy from braking zones where temperatures are climbing, and even modulate fuel injection timing to shed heat microsecond by microsecond. It's not one solution, it's dozens layered on top of each other, all working in concert to push the absolute edge of what physics allows. So here's what we've learned. Altitude and temperature aren't obstacles. They're puzzles that separate the champions from the rest. Every tenth of a degree, every millibar of atmospheric pressure demands a fresh decision from the power unit software and its engineers. Monaco and Mexico City aren't just different races on a calendar. They're entirely different thermodynamic battlegrounds. The team that masters this dance, that reads the air, understands the fuel, and trusts their hybrid system, wins the margin. Now we want to hear from you. Should we dive next into tire degradation curves, DRS activation strategies, or how hybrid systems actually harvest energy under braking? Drop your vote in the comments below, and please subscribe so you never miss an episode where we lift the hood on motorsport's greatest engineering puzzles.